got around about 3 or 4 minutes until we go and we start the formalities, and then we start speaking to Alan in about 9 minutes from now. We are powered by Cisco Webex, of course, and it's wonderful to have Cisco on board with Telstra Connected Cycling to help us continue to build our community and have influence right around the country and right around the world for people who are dealing with COVID and all the things that comes with COVID. So thank you very much to Cisco. Oh, we should also say that we're on YouTube now. One of our past, I think it was the great Phil Liggett, Phil Liggett MBE is up. If you go to YouTube and put in Telstra Connected Cycling, you'll find the interview we did with Phil Liggett a few weeks ago.
And Alan, I didn't tell you when we caught up before. I'm actually recording the session.
Say that again, Anna, sorry.
I'm actually recording the session. Just wanted to, I forgot to tell you when we caught up earlier.
Okay, yeah, very good.
Thank you.
And there's a BackPedal promo. Good morning, Diane. We've just voluntold you that you're going to be doing the voice from the bunch later on today at the other end of the interview with Alan. If that's okay, if you can prepare your little self for that, it'd be great.
Rightio then. I'll be on a mountain, so Alan, you'll appreciate that. I'm about
Mount
to
Coot-tha?
some efforts with Mount Coot-tha is the one.
Okay, great.
I'm happy.
6.5.
So, Di, just to give you a bit of a timeline, we're going to be coming to you pretty much in exactly an hour.
Cool. That's good. I can do that.
I can conquer the mountain in an hour.
I give myself 5 minutes to calm my breath down. How are we all this morning? How are you going, Alan?
Very good, thank you. Been excited all day after our talk this morning and this session anyway.
Couldn't sleep last night. What's it like over there at the moment? It's been a good day?
It was a really nice morning when I went for a ride, but rained again this afternoon, and the wind is about 35 kilometres an hour. It's been pretty strong the last couple of weeks, and it hasn't stopped raining for about a month. So today was a really nice day just to be out on the bike and not get wet. I had to wash my bike, but that's just every day this time of year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I go really early with a question? Alan, where are you?
I'm in just outside of Gerardsbergen in eastern Flanders, sort of halfway between Ghent and Brussels, but a bit south.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks.
I just want to make a shout out. I've just noticed Bjorn Engelbrecht on the, I've noticed spotted you there, Bjorn, in your black sheep kit.
I am. I'm in quarantine in Brisbane, so what else to do but to get up and ride?
Oh, brilliant.
Do you normally reside in Singapore?
I technically I live in Singapore, but I'm a Queensland resident for COVID.
Oh, awesome.
Which hotel they got you in, Bjorn?
The Ridges, looking out over the city. It's as far as quarantine goes, it's lovely. A balcony, a trainer. What else could be better?
Yeah, no, fantastic. We've just got to get you a dodgy reception so you can't work. So you can have a decent rest.
So many things I could say to that, but great to be joining you guys.
Thank you for your grace, Bjorn, and enjoy your pedaling this morning, mate. If you want to go on mute, we'll get rolling, guys. All right. Great to see so many people on, and great to see so many people showing up after Melbourne Cup Day. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to Telstra Connected Cycling on video series. We've been surprised and delighted by the success of this series, of course, and a big shout out goes to those Telstra Connected Cycling Pro team of Sandy Woolley, Diane Hannon, Kurt Houston, John Pitchen and Darren Mills, Cam Thomas, Nick Hoare, and the one and only Anna Mallon, who makes us all look very, very good. So this series has brought so much important connection to our riders and our walkers, our joggers, our listeners, and the wider community every Wednesday morning since March. It brings inspiration and a sense of being together at a regular time to learn all about some famous, courageous and inspiring people, and this morning is no different. We've been able to extend our reach, not just from our internal network and teams inside Telstra, but to influence groups in LinkedIn, Facebook, Zwift, and now YouTube on our journey. And we'd like to make an even bigger impact as we head into the summer months. Now, this morning, we are joined by a truly inspirational Aussie in Alan Peiper, who is calling in from his home in Belgium. And before we speak to Alan, let's get an update on from our ride director, Sandy Woolley, who did a sensational job with the Amy Gillett Foundation over the weekend with their fundraiser in Melbourne on Sunday. And I think you've got a hidden talent as a roving reporter. Sandy. On mute. Sandy, are you stuck in Zwift? Any chance of speaking, Sandy?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, mate. Get into it.
I don't know
Get into it.
You missed a great opening. I don't know if I can repeat that. So, again, thanks very much, Duncan. It was a lot of fun last Sunday, and of course, we love to pay it forward with all of our guests in any way we can. And the Amy Gillett Foundation Grand Fondo on Zwift last Sunday, a great day, had by all and good funds raised for riding safety on the road. Welcome to everyone, wherever you are around the world, whatever it is you're doing, riding, cycling, walking, doona diving. It's great to have you here. All our clubs, AHTR members, IBCC, Brunswick Cycling Club, Hawthorn Cycling Club, we've got everyone here. So if I haven't mentioned your club, let me know and I'll give you a call out next time. As Duncan said, jump onto YouTube. We're delighted. It took us a little while, but we're delighted to now be able to release previous interviews on our interview.
We're losing your connection, mate. We might have to wrap it up. Yep, we've lost him. He's in his pain cave. He's in the basement. He's pedaling along, and we have lost him. Hopefully, you can still see us. But that was Sandy. Oh, we'll just crack into it. So our guest this morning is Alan Peiper, who, as a young man, like so many of our pro riders and our riding guests over the last 6 months, headed to Europe as a teenager, seeking the dream of being a world cycling champion. And he did just that. After a star-studded amateur career, he became a pro for well over a decade. And with stage wins in the Giro d'Italia as well as the Tour de France, amongst dozens of race victories for his glamorous pro teams, including Peugeot, Panasonic, and the Fab Tulip Computers. It's an absolute pleasure to say good evening in Belgium to Alan Peiper, and thanks for joining us, mate. It must make you smile every time when you say Tulip Computers, when you look back on that.
It does, yeah. It's a form of embarrassment, dressed in green like a frog, wearing those white time shoes that we had to wear. It was too much for my colour coordination.
Well, let's talk about where it all started for you, because you did go over there. Like, you know, we've spoken to Matt Heyman and Mark Renshaw, and we've spoken to Phil Liggett and Matt Keenan and all these pros. And you head over there with such big dreams for young Aussies. And it must have been so intimidating to get over there in the 70s, late 70s, because riding was very, very different. Can you explain what it was like over there?
Well, when I arrived in Belgium, I just turned 17 years old, 17 and 2 weeks. And I would have been 16, but there was a flight traffic controller strike. You know how that used to go in Melbourne. So I couldn't get out, flight delayed. I was 17 and 2 weeks. So I arrived after 2 days travel and about 5 stops in London, red bus to the city, and then train to Dover, and 4 hours on the boat in a storm getting to Ostende, another train ride to Ghent, and a taxi just to any hotel we could get. It was midnight. Bags everywhere. And anyway, we slept in Café de Naza, which means, or Hotel de Naza, which means the Steel Hotel. Anyway, we stayed there one night, and we had just an address of a lady in Ghent, Rosa de Snurk. We went to see her in the morning. but she had no rooms left. So she said, come back tomorrow, I'll see what I can find. And we stayed in the youth hostel that night, which was more of a drunk shelter than anything else. But, the impression I got from Ghent back in those days, it's really completely transformed since then. But a lot of the shops were shut down and boarded up. And there was always this insipid smell about Ghent, because it's situated on the Schelde River. The Leie, another river, runs into there as well. And, stagnant water and, drainage and all the rest of it. And that was sort of what typified Ghent. We would even say it was very much, Middle Ages still. From where we were in Australia with, TV even all day long, then TV only came on at 5 o'clock in Belgium in those days. And very much, I won't say backward, but a lot slower than Australia than it was back then.
Well, welcome to pro cycling, mate. What a fantastic trip, and what a beautiful way to kick off. Not, hey, but very quickly, you fell into being very, very successful as an amateur to begin with, and so it looks like you understood what racing was, and you really had a heart for racing, even though you came back to Australia a little bit disillusioned and went then back again in the very, very early 80s. You came home for a stint, and then you went back, and then your pro career really took off, and then the big teams arrived, like Peugeot, the powerhouse Panasonic, before, and that was over 12 years. So you really did understand the game. And just the way you told that story, you've got a bit of a photographic memory and a detailed memory.
Oh, for some things I do, yeah. I mean, some things as a young kid, they sort of stick in your mind, And when I arrived, I couldn't race for a month, so I'd run out of money by the time that month was up. As a 17-year-old, there's no iPhone and no way of calling home with WhatsApp or YouTube or whatever. The telephone calls were too expensive, and a letter took about three or 4 weeks to get a reply. So very much on your own and really in survival mode, having to get to the next meal, So it was a tough school back then, But there'd been other Australians in Ghent, and our reputation preceded me, which paved the way with a lot of Belgians because they really liked Aussies, Danny Clark, Donnie Allen, David Allen. There'd been a lot of guys there, even, Ronnie Baines had been through there. A lot of Aussies that had created a lot of good vibe in the cycling community here.
Yeah, so what type of rider were you, mate, in the early days?
Well, look, I won Australian sprint title as a juvenile. I won Australian pursuit as a junior, and I was second and third at junior world championships in the points race. But as my career went on, I think my speciality was time trialing anyway. I won time trials in the Dauphiné Paris-Nice, and quite a few were in the amateur ranks as well. But what I really wanted to be was a classics rider. So I lost a lot of speed in my pro career as I tried to become a classics rider, because those races are, over 250 Ks long, and the speed comes off a little bit. But maybe I should have stuck to what I was good at for a little while longer.
Did you ever think you'd have such a long and I guess star-studded or results career as you did when you first got over there? Because you explained basically how long it took you to get over there in that first trip as a 17-year-old. And like you said, going from hand to mouth, contract to contract in the early days, or just basically meal to meal in the early days as you're riding out. Did you have any sort of what was your vision back then? Did you have a vision that you were going to be over there and put Australia on the map, or you were going to be a classics winner several times over? Or how did it all unfold from the contracts with Peugeot and Panasonic and then into Tulip?
Well, look, there's a lot of questions in there, but, in a nutshell, basically, leaving to go to Belgium was more of an escape from my home life, my parents splitting up, and more or less ending on the street as a 16-year-old, living with a family of a friend of mine. And then another mate of mine, Brian Gillen, was going to Belgium the next year, and I said, "Can I come with you?" And he said, "Yes." So that was more or less a way out, stopped school. I went to work in a factory. The people I lived with were pretty good to me, only asked me $10 a week for rent, and I saved $50. Had my air ticket after 6 months, and my mother met me at a set of traffic lights at Southland and signed a paper that I could leave Australia, gave me $300 and a kiss, and the rest is history. So, I didn't really have any ideas about grandeur. I started riding in a little town in Victoria called Yea, where there was 1,100 people living and one bike rider. And that was Murray Collins. He put an old rusty frame together for me, and we went to a race around the Alexandra football field, and that's also history. So, I didn't really have any of these aspirations of representing Australia. It was more of an escape. I'd been Australian champion a couple of times, and I was good for my age, and getting to Belgium was an escape from my situation in Australia. But and I never really thought about being pro in those first years. There was one guy in Ghent here who said in Flemish, and I'll translate it. He said, "I was an angry young man," and actually that's what I was. I was an angry young man, and I just wanted to race, and I wanted to rip everyone's legs off, and I wanted to be the best. And I never thought about turning pro in that whole process. I just focused on what I was doing today and trying to do it the best that I could, And somehow I had this innate feeling inside me that by doing that, things would fall into place as I go,
Your relationship with the bike is pretty special, isn't it? Like we talk to champions, and you listen to champions when they get interviewed. Like when you talk about Greg Norman, he talks about golf as if it's like a partner, and you talk to Ian Thorpe when he talks about his swimming. That swimming basically was a relationship that he was in and stuff like that. It sounds like the bike for you, Alan, was the biggest relationship in your life in the early days.
Yeah, and going back to that first memory of bikes, that's all I wanted was a bike. I learned to ride on a football field, in case I crashed. I wanted a bike all my youth, and I finally got one at 10 years old, an old second-hand bike with a fixed wheel, crashed in the first corner. But it was a form of freedom that sort of, gave me an opportunity, And I was good at all sports in Australia. At school in Australia, we get to try everything. You have to go to the swim gym, or even if you can't swim, you have to go to athletics, you have to do cross-country running. And when I got a taste of cycling, it was something that I could put my stamp on. And actually, I think my cycling was more an avenue for releasing the frustrations that were building up in this young kid, And of course, when you get success, it's sort of addictive, as you know.
Absolutely. So tell us about what the feeling was like when a bit of security arrived with your first contract with Peugeot.
Yeah, well, that final year that I was amateur, I raced. I lived in Paris with ACBB, which was sort of the feeder club to Peugeot, and a lot of good bike riders have been through there. Robert Miller, Stephen Roach, Phil Anderson, Sean Yates. There's a whole series of riders that went through that club before me. I had a bit of a rough start of the year. I didn't really like living in Paris. I didn't have any money. The Frenchies were sort of against me because they knew I was going to take their place. There was only 1 or 2 places a year, and for the 5 years before, it had always been the foreigners that went in. So that was a bit tough, but I liked racing in France. It was good, and finally, there was a couple of mishaps where I missed winning a couple of races early season that could have led to a pro contract. But finally, I won the Grand Prix des Nations at the end of the season, which was more or less the World Championship of time trials in those days, and sealed the deal to get a contract. So went into Peugeot, 14 riders on the team, and 5 of them were English speaking. Phil Anderson was obviously there. So I had some good compatriots around, Robert Miller, Stephen Roach, Sean Yates as well. So I had a few guys to bounce off in those first couple of years. And Peugeot was a safe haven because the French, not so cutthroat. They weren't in those days in cycling. And I could move back to Belgium and basically start my life off again,
Okay, so there's your safety and having that Aussie mafia around you in Peugeot to foster you along. Who was the biggest influence in your pro career?
I think biggest influence was Phil Anderson for sure. We'd raced together at the Hawthorn Cycling Club. We travelled with the president of the club, Ted Sanders, the father of David Sanders, well-known Australian coach. We travelled to races with him to South Australia. And so Phil I knew for a very long time, and he turned pro before me, had the yellow jersey, obviously. And Phil was sort of a real cutting-edge guy. He was cutting edge with, the way he trained, using heart rate monitor. You know, even he had a TC Mercedes with a compressor in the back of it to pump his tires up. So, you know, stuff like that. And Phil made a really big impression for me. And I would have gladly become his number one man as a helper. But Phil didn't really think that way, you know. He was very much sort of a solitary man and didn't really need that help. But he definitely influenced me a lot in my career.
Maybe one of the influences that had Alan more than anything else was his love of the bike as well. We spoke to him on Sunday on the Great Ocean Road in this beautiful spot for the Amy Gillett Foundation that he is a patron of. And again, his love for the bike still shines through as he stood in this beautiful, beautiful spot in country Victoria on this classic ride, doing the right thing for the biking community with bike safety. So maybe he imparted the love of the bike that he had because did you sport the same mullet? Because he wore a mullet for a really, really long time. Did the love affair with Phil for Alan Peiper sport a mullet?
No, I was definitely my own man. You know, I didn't follow Phil in that, but yeah, he was a real trendsetter. Him and Greg LeMond, you know, they brought a lot of things onto the market. You know, with whether it be hard shell helmets, Oakley glasses. My first pair of Oakleys, the pilots, I got them from Phil. You know, no one else had glasses, and Phil gave me a pair of his, which was, you know, really, really great. But you know, those two, you know, Phil and Greg LeMond were really trendsetters and cutting edge back in those days. And Phil did the same with his mullet. That's what it was.
Yeah, exactly. It was wicked. Hey, who was the favorite? Which was your favorite team out of all the pro teams that you're on? Which was your favorite team to be on and why?
Well, obviously, you know, Panasonic was, because it was the top team of that era. It had a lot of success running in from TI Rally, Panasonic the first year before I got there, or the first 2 years. So, you know, it's where I wanted to be. Peugeot was 3 years of preparation, not really organised as a team and not really, I want to say cutthroat, but maybe not as professional as Panasonic was. And the last couple of years with Tulip Computers was more about a change and a possibility for a new environment for me, and also cashing in on the results, which I wasn't going to get at Panasonic. But Panasonic was definitely the team I wanted to be in, and I would have signed for nothing probably if that's what they offered me.
So when you talk about transition with Tulip, were you transitioning into life out of the saddle?
Probably, yeah. I was definitely looking. I was definitely doing quite a bit of belly gazing at that time, and looking at how I ticked and how I could iron out some of the chinks in my personality. I think that led to thinking a lot about what I was doing, and is this really what I want to do, and does this serve a purpose? And I think once you get to that point as a sportsman, the tide's already changed. You know, you need to be fully focused and ruthless and prepared to sacrifice, you know, 100% to reach the top without any extra, you know, activities on the outside.
Which rider would you, by the time you retired, which rider of today would you liken yourself to? Would it be a George Hincapie, captain of the road, or although you might not have been the GC leader of the team? Who would you sort of like liken yourself with what you're like inside the team and doing for the team?
That's a tough one, yeah.
Because you're a master strategist. Like the reputation that you had in the team in the interviews that I've seen and riders around your time was, you know, sport directors basically went after you because of your detailed knowledge and detailed preparation. Because before, you know, we see detailed preparers these days in all sort of sports, and they get that reputation of sort of like doing the extras, doing the little things, showing up early, having that discipline. And before that was a thing, you were doing it. You know, in the off season, you were doing special training, you were getting ready for the bike. You know, you talked about Phil Anderson being, you know, a trendsetter and a sort of performer that way with new things. But your reputation, Alan, was one of someone who knows every single corner in the races, knows everything about nutrition, knows everything about his bike, knows everything, you know, prepares differently in the off season to make sure that you're the best Alan Peiper you can be in the team, on the saddle, in the race.
Yep. And I think there's another word they use for that, but we probably can't use that while we're live. But yeah, that sort of
What's that, like pedantic or Nazi or what?
anal.
Anally retentive. Okay, no worries.
No, anyway, but actually, if I would compare myself to somebody, the first name that pops to my mind would be Stefan Kung. He rides for Française de Joux now, time trialist, can win some time trials, has been riding well in the classics, but a good team helper and knows when to ride himself, and a detailed type of guy. The next one that springs to mind, part of me, would be a bit like Rowan Dennis. And there was a time some years ago where, someone mentioned that I was angry as a cut snake. And then a few other Aussies came along and I thought, yeah, there's a couple of us. And finally I realised most of Australians have an element of angry as a cut snake within them, I think it's part of our colonisation, that we all have that in us somewhere,
Does that translate really, really well in the team environment on the road, that cut snake attitude?
Well, I think it does in a way if you can control it. You have to fit in socially. But if that leads to you excelling in what you do as a team player, I think then you can really use it for its highest cause.
Yeah. So that discipline. I guess that discipline attitude around your fury and things like that, because there's been many Australians who've gone over there, dozens and dozens and dozens of Australians, but there's so few of those dozens that actually are able to discipline themselves to make a career out of it. You would have seen young Aussies come over with big hopes over the decades and leave because they're just not suited to the hard work of it.
Oh yeah, I've seen some kids come over, and another one, a young guy, not young anymore, springs to mind, Peter Attard. It was just a young kid that came over, 16 years old, super talented, but he couldn't cut it mentally. And there's been more kids like that. I mean, it's a long way from home. Okay, and the environment changed, but even so, staying in contact with friends, and those are parts of my life I really missed out on. I still miss my friends, kids that I grew up with that I'm still in contact with, but they've been out of my life my whole life. We catch up every few years. And there's nothing like a real Aussie friendship. You can be around a Pommy or an American, but the stuff you laugh about isn't the same as laughing with a guy from Australia. That sort of insider knowledge of what we know is not the same. So I think a lot of that is heavy on kids coming over. But things have changed and communication is much better, and the pro bike riders have a lot better lifestyle than they used to do, and travel is easier, so it has become a bit more easier for them.
Yeah, the pathways are definitely there, and they're well worn now. And like I said with Matty Hayman last week, there's definitely an Australian mafia over there, making things a little bit easier and getting better deals for the youngsters as they come over and getting those pathways cemented. So that was life in the saddle for Alan Peiper. Now you're switching, and how hard was it to leave the peloton, to leave the racing, and forge a new career in the car or with the teams? How easy was that transition? Did it happen quickly? Did you get an opportunity early, or did you have to fight for that as well?
Well, I did have an opportunity at the end of '91, but and that was with Jim Ockowitz, was with the US Postal, and I could come in there as first director. But I wanted to do one more year as a rider and finish my career off as I'd planned with the contract that I had, and I missed the opportunity because the next year wasn't there, and teams were very much nationalistic. Okay, Oach had an American team, but his team was full by then. And I applied at Dutch teams and Belgian teams and French teams for a job as director sportif or public relations, and there was never an opportunity to come. So actually, I went out of the sport after a couple of years of doing television and writing articles and training camps because didn't seem to be a career there or a real life continuity. And my first wife had a fast food business with her family here. And as funny as it is, because a few people laughed at me, I sold hamburgers and hot dogs for a while, for about 10 years. Made a good business of that. We really built that up and, made some good money as she promised me we would. But one thing sticks in my mind from that. I remember standing at a fair and two young English-speaking kids coming over and saying hello to me. I knew him from around the traps, and they're walking away and hearing this other kid say to him, "From hero to zero."
Oh.
And so it sort of cut like a knife, you know. But I tell this because that was so good for my ego. It was so good for my ego, and knowing things can change fast in your life. And so when I got the opportunity to come back into Peloton 10 or 12 years later, which never happens, if you've been out of the Peloton that long and at 45 years old to get an opportunity to become director sportif, that never happens. So I got an opportunity to come back in, and I was very much aware that I had to appreciate every moment, and I had to appreciate the life I had and never take it for granted. And I think, you know, that hero to zero really helped me keep my feet on the ground and realize it could change any day. So I never had to get a big head about it, you know.
Were you any good when you first came back in, mate, as one of the sport directors? Were you in a lead role, or were you basically doing an apprenticeship?
I was doing an apprenticeship. And unfortunately, the team I was in wasn't really, there wasn't much of a learning process. I really wanted to get ahead. Unfortunately, after the first 2 years, they weren't going to keep me. And then I got an opportunity to go to T-Mobile, which turned into HTC High Road. And then my career kicked off. Because when I came into T-Mobile, there'd been a big turnover of management because of a doping scandal. And from what I'd heard and read, when the opportunity knocks, you should take as much as you can get. And I took everything on: staff program, rider program, full race program, working in the office. I took on every job I could get, and I excelled at it. And it took some really hard work. But, you know, the more you take, the more, no one is ever indispensable. But I think in that sense, I made myself indispensable in a way that they really needed me around, and that set the tone for, you know, the next 10 years of my career. I got the opportunity and I ran with it.
So, guys, I can see everybody's pedaling away, and we're at the 23-minute mark of the ride. If you've got any questions as we head into, the Tour de France, or we're about to come up, talk with Alan, as well as, COVID conditions and other things going on in his life, please post your questions in the chat, and I'll get to them as we go through with this. So, Alan, you've called out that you're annually retentive. were you data driven in terms of all those roles that you took on as the director? Were you looking at all those things that you look at cycling, all those things that you look on the races, all those things that you look at with the cars and strategy and who's going up the road, who's not going to the road, and all that kind of thing? Were you data driven, or, to use a modern term, were you a man manager? Were you better a man manager, or were you data driven in terms of the early days?
Well, if I look back 15, 16 years ago, there was hardly the internet. There wasn't the communication systems there are in place now. And what I realized really quick, and what one guy told me, is you need to find the framework of your job first and make sure you can do that. And that can be getting the riders out of bed, what time you leave for the start, getting to the start, how you talk in the radio, being forceful in the radio, but, a way of talking in the radio that comes across that you have a power in your voice. All of those little things that go together to planning the day, doing the bike race and getting back to the hotel. You have to fill in that first before you can learn other skills and add to that repertoire of skill set, And fortunately, like I said, with the T-Mobile days, I took a lot of planning and programming on board. And then when I got the opportunity to go to BMC, I went in a job as setting up a performance department, which was pretty much completely new for me. But I'd been interested in, in testing before and training modalities and a lot of stuff. So as much as I wasn't a specialist, I got to go and choose the coaches and set up the platform that they were going to work off, and find the nutritionists and bring in the physiotherapists and work out a program for them that overlapped and the riders got to be seen, and work on positioning in the wind tunnel and all of those things at BMC. So every few years I was learning different skills that probably accumulated to this year at the Tour de France, because, then I could do the job, which we'll talk about in a minute, but I could put my stamp on it, and in so many different ways,
So what about the stamp with different nationalities? T-Mobile, the German team, you've gone in Peugeot and Panasonic and Tulip and things like that as a rider, different nationality in those teams. Nick wants to know, as the DS, do riders just do as you say? Do they negotiate, or do they just ignore instructions at time that the DS gives them? So how do you negotiate those cultural differences and historically cultural difference? Because you talked about Postal before, an American team doing it very, very different, the Blue Train. So how did you manage that, the historical, the cultural, and then, basically did the riders just do as you say in the early days?
Well, if I can go back 25 years to the period where, I was just finishing races, director sportifs were very hard-handed, The younger generation don't accept that now anymore. When I came back in as a director sportif 15, 16 years old, part of my job was staying away at night to make sure they weren't going out, which has completely changed the last 10 years. And I don't even have to think about that because it's so hard, this job. They have to be on the ball all the time or they're losing their job. That's the bottom line of it. 15, 16 years ago, I would say as a new director sportif, they're testing you. Now, I remember being in the bus with Robin McEwen and him asking me questions about, okay, which direction is the wind coming from in the final? And you got to remember there's no apps back in those days. And he was testing me in a good way. But some riders test you like kids test you as well, They test how far they can push you and test how much they can wrap you around their finger. And I think being born as somebody who wasn't born with an authority as a natural gift, I had to learn that authority. And I think as you go through the years, and I've got to the point now where I'm not really worried about what they think of me.
Interesting.
I don't need to be the friend of Tadej Pogacar. We need to get along. But I also need to be half a psychologist as well, because like you asked the question about all those nationalities, I had to constantly keep fitting in with Belgians and Dutch and French and Germans and Americans. And and now with the Italians, it's the same thing. There's so much to learn about that Italian culture, and they never confront each other with words. I mean, something I've learned, you just don't confront each other because that might, put somebody else down in a different light, and that's not what they do. So even in your meetings, you need to be a psychologist in the ways you bring that across. But if I can just finish on that one point, cycling and meetings in the team bus and objectives and individual roles per day are very much written down and presented before the race so they know exactly what's expected of them. And if you do a debrief, you can pull them up on that and ask them, well, how did your day go? Because this is what's expected of you. And all their teammates know that as well. So no matter what nationality they are, there's no getting out of it.
So you make them accountable in these days and day and age by having a strategy session that they buy into, and it's something that we understand in corporate life all the time, whether it's agile ways of working or human-centered design or how we do our corporate, that we want our teams to buy in. We want our teams to put their hand up to actually state on a board that everyone can see this is the work I'm going to do. And whether it's a time box of a race day, like you guys do, 150 to 200 Ks in a day, or it's a sprint 2 weeks here at Telstra or whatever it is, we want our teams to buy in. And is that the big difference this year? And we're going to get to the Tour de France in a second, but is that the big difference in the way you're doing your direct sportif work with the teams to get them to buy in?
Yeah, I think in the last years it's really evolved, especially in the sense of communication-wise, the way you present the meeting in the bus, because we have better technology in the bus to present a PowerPoint. You prepare your PowerPoint a long time before the race. Tour de France, I had all the PowerPoints done when we arrived in Nice. I didn't need to start on them again. Of course, I needed to tweak them for the wind direction, day-to-day tactics as the race evolved, but I more or less had that all down and dialed. So I think the forms of communication are much better. And as a director sportif, sometimes you need to prime riders in their room, so they're ready for what you're going to give them in the team bus, that they're not taken back by it and you don't get resistance from them in the meeting. So there is a lot of politics behind getting things done. But I think that you learn that in your people skills, because if you go to the Tour de France, you have 8 different riders, sometimes 8 different nationalities, 8 different personalities, and they all function in a different way. And putting all of that together with all their aspirations and their secret little hopes for themselves, and how they think in their mind is a challenge all of the time. So I think it's like you said, corporate, you do the same thing, but we maybe have different circumstances because we're more emotional and physical based.
Well, there's an emotional Tour de France for you because you're actually back in the car after a very, very large cancer scare. It was almost like a miracle that you were there, and we're going to talk about how you divided up your energy to make sure that you were there at the end and not a casualty of the crazy Tour de France of 2020. But tell us a little bit about the cancer and how you battled on. You had it for 5 years.
Yeah, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer 5 years ago, well, more than 5 years, 5.5 years ago. Had an operation to remove my prostate, but my prostate had broken when they got it out. So cells had already started to spread. Had another operation 1.5 years later to remove lymph from my lower abdomen. That was all right for a while. Then it got some more growth back. Then had 40 sessions of radiation about 2.5 years ago. That was all okay after that. And then the next evolution was that it had spread to different parts of my body, into my chest and a lung and a rib. They needed to come out with a big hammer, as the doctor said it, and hit it on the head to give me more life afterwards. So they came out with chemotherapy and did the same time hormone therapy, which was sort of like a double whammy, the hormone therapy to keep my testosterone down, and the chemo to kill as many cells as they could. It's been a traumatic 5 years, but actually a deep experience into myself and refining myself each time and coming back with that inner strength and authority to lead, And that's not easy, because you really need to feel that inner strength and authority in your own belief in yourself. And if that has gone because of sickness or weakness or your fear of not being capable, then you don't come across in the right way. So that's been definitely a big human challenge for me, but also a real learning experience.
So as an athlete, your body's your instrument, and you know it intimately. You know when you're tired, you know when you're depleted, you know when you're bonking, you know when you're ready to go. You're very, very finely tuned. But as an athlete, also as a top-level athlete, you have that inner strength, that resilience, that courage to go forward and suffer, if you want to put it that way. You must have needed all of that in terms of your 5-year battle at different times. It would have been so disappointing to have that diagnosis all the way through. I know you're so far from probably your best physically, but because of your strength, your body was able to battle through it. Tough times.
Yep. No, you're right. And I'm lucky I had my job. And as funny as it is, I love my job. But what I really love about my job is being around young, motivated people who want to achieve something. And I'm an instrument to give them the opportunity to do that. And that's such a driving force in one's life that I think that's my purpose, So wanting to get back to that, to have Greg van Avermaet win Paris-Roubaix, or have Rowan Dennis win the Tour de France prologue, or all of these kids that I've had along the way feed me, that I can be a part of their success and be an administrator of their success, as it were. So I always had reason to keep fighting on and coming back and trying to do my job again. And my job warped, and I was very lucky that I've had people in the teams that I was in who supported me all through those operations and the time off that I had, even though I kept working as much as I could while I was home, that I could come back to the same place without judgment and move on to greater heights,
So you came back, and UAE is the perfect team. They understand your value. They understand what it means to you after your cancer battle. You find yourself in the car heading into the strangest Tour de France you're ever going to see. You're the lead DS before, and you've had great success before with Ryder Hagedol and a couple of the other riders when you were in charge. But what was your confidence like coming into the Tour de France this year? You got a good team, great team, as it turns out, amazing team. But what were you like, Alan, coming into the Tour de France this year? Were you nervous?
Yeah, I was actually, Duncan. At the end of last year, I did a couple of one-day races to test the water, how my senses were, driving the car, being in the peloton, doing my meetings, doing a day's work, which was already a test. I looked after myself really well in the winter, went to Tour Down Under, and that was my first test of, was I capable of doing this job again? And came through that with sort of flying colours from myself. Ulysses finished second overall, and Jasper Philipsen won the points jersey at Tour Down Under. So I came back with a good feeling, but because of COVID, that whole process was stopped, and I didn't get to go to Paris-Nice, and we didn't get to do a lot of races, sort of mid-year. And when COVID, when the borders opened up again, there was only a few races left before the Tour de France. I'd had the time to do the preparation for the Tour, but in myself, I wasn't confident that I could get through 3 weeks, that I could get through with enough energy to do the job as I was meant to do it and as I wanted to do it. And I knew that I could put some things in place by having my colleagues do all the logistic work, so they never had to look at that. But it was definitely something that was in the back of my mind, that's for sure.
So what are the things that you put in place this time? You battle with cancer, you come in, you're underdone. You're underdone in terms of your own preparation. You got an arduous 21 days. You're a big vision expert, Alan. So you would have had a big vision coming into this for your team, especially certain riders on your team. You would have had a big vision coming in crystal clear of what it could, stage by stage, work out. But what are the sort of things that you did personally every day to make sure that you're going to be there in 21 days?
Yeah. Well, to back that up, what I said to the riders in Nice was, we have a unique opportunity. I felt that to the core of my being. So I knew we had this unique opportunity, and I was the driver, so I needed to be driving. I know myself, as you said, I've been a sportsman. I know how my body ticks. I know how it feels, and I know what keeps me alive. So one of the basic things is food, and I don't eat much meat. So I agreed with the chef, who only cooks for the riders, that he would make me a salad every night. And at least I had one plate that was ready for me to go so that I could eat and go to bed if I needed to. The other thing was, luckily in this team, I can ride my bike in the morning. It's still a little bit dangerous as the leader of the team to go out for a ride in case you crash or whatever. But I could get on my bike every couple of days at 7 o'clock in the morning, ride for an hour, and come back, have my shower, be at breakfast with staff. And that really sort of got my body in tune for what I need to do. You all know that feeling. When you do some sport, your endocrines start flowing and the energy's there, and that's what I needed. So I could do that most days if we left the hotel after 10 o'clock. Another couple of small things that I did was, before bed at night, I tried to do 2 yoga poses, which took me about 15 minutes. But just bring my energy down and do some rhythmic breathing to bring my energy right down before I went to sleep so I could sleep deeper. And when I woke up in the morning, try and do a short meditation, 20 to 30 minutes, just to bring my mind back into focus and, free up all that jumble that was in there of the stages coming and the emotions that were happening, and try and stay as focused and centered as I could, to do my job the best I could.
All right, well, let's get to the racing part, because while you've got your yoga going on and you're doing your downward dog at night, things are unfolding on the road like you wouldn't believe, all the way up to the last time trial. And again, you were set for that last time trial. When you set up this team for UAE and Tadej Pogačar as your 21-year-old, things were happening all the way through, but it didn't all go according to plan. There were some time dropped that made you furious. Yeah. There,
especially the stage to Lavaux, I think it was stage 7. Tadej lost a minute and a quarter in the crosswind. He'd had a puncture 40 k's to go. There was a crash in front of him by the Bahrain guys, 35 k's to go. And at 30 k's to go, we turned left into the crosswind. He wasn't there. His teammates weren't around him. And I could see the race unfolding weeks ahead and knew that this was going to be possibly disastrous for everything we wanted to achieve. Of course, I had to put those emotions on the side. And of course, I was in the radio with them, egging them on, trying to give them confidence, telling them to ride, even telling Tade, you need to ride. Don't just let the rest ride. You need to ride as well. And he rode on the front and all the way to the finish line. Kept the loss down to 1:15. But I remember standing outside the bus, absolutely fuming. My other director and my boss in the car sort of trying to calm me down, but there's no calming down. I could see the picture and stood there for 10 minutes. None of the staff spoke to me. I give the riders time to have a shower and get their senses back. And I went into the bus for the debrief. I said, okay, guys, sit down. Let's do the debrief. And I just said a few words myself and said, tell me how the fuck this can happen, that we miss a 70 fucking rider breakaway and none of you were there. Tell me how that happened. That's all I said, not to one person, just to the whole group. And they all had their tails between their legs, their heads were down, and one by one they told me their story of how it all happened, and apologised to the leader, and the leader apologised to them. But by the time the meeting had finished, they had their heads up. We buried the hatchet. We went back to the hotel. We didn't mention it again. But the next morning, I'd slept on it, came into the bus the next morning. We got the bus set up. And the first thing I said when we got the bus set up, got the PowerPoint set up was, I've decided that I'm going to fight all the way to Paris. Are you guys going to fight with me? And I really meant it. And I saw them sitting there looking at me, like, what's this guy on about?
It didn't help that you had boxing gloves on. Hey, when that was the moment, I guess, that led to the time trial at the end, and none of us could predict that that time trial, that dodgy time trial helmet on Roglic was going to set up. It was just the most amazing Tour de France moment that I've ever seen. And you can go back to Le Mans, you can go back to Armstrong, you can go back to so many riders at so many moments and pivotal moments, and our own great Cadel Evans, of course. But that must have been an incredible day. How'd you set it up?
Yeah, well, when setting up that day was some meticulous planning. I travelled down to Planche de Belfi in June, 2 days after the lockdown ended in France. Drove down 700 kilometres by myself in the rain and was definitely questioning myself what I was doing. No one had asked me to do it. No one had sent me down there. No one had suggested it. But I drove down and I took my bike with me. I rode in the afternoon. I drove across the course in the afternoon and wrote down the first set of course notes. The next morning, I rode my bike across it to get the feeling of how the course felt and try to understand what sort of gears we would need on the two different bikes and if a bike change was even necessary. And when I did that ride, I realised how ultimately important it was that I was there, because the gears that were going to be needed for the Titi bike were completely different from the gears that were going to be needed for the road bike. And there was no doubt about a bike change because of the gears. And I have to tell you, Planche de Belfi, I had to stop twice on the way up to have a rest, but I did get to the top, and I was using 3630 to get to the top. So I had an idea if I was using 3630 that those guys, those pros, were going to be using 3619 to 25. And it turned out that was right. And what I realised, that it's not just a straight climb with the same gradient all the time. It was constantly changing, 8%, 10%, 12%, a little dip, 8%, 14%, 12%. So a lot of change in percentage, and a lot of times you're going to need to change your gears. And what we did was get a juniors cassette, 14:29, so 14, 16, 18, straight run to 25, 27, 29. And we have 10-speed, 11-speed with Campagnolo, so that could all fit in. And the mechanics laughed at me at the start, but when we went back a month later with Tadej, we had a 58 chainring on his TT bike, one chainring, 11:29. We did 3 rides, 2 to see the course, and the second one to do bike change repetitions. And the third one, a full simulation in TT suit and helmet. And the gears were perfect. He rode middle of the block, full gas to the top, and I knew, he had it dialed. So when the Tour de France came about, we had a 250K transfer the night before. The original plan was to drive the 50Ks in the morning, ride the course again, do a bike change, have a look at the climb again, back to the start. We booked a hotel 3Ks from the start, and he could have a rest then, come to do his warm-up, and then do his ride. But because of the late transfer the night before, at 11 o'clock at night, we decided, I said to him, what do you want to do? Do you want to do as we planned, or you could sleep until 10 o'clock, put the riders in your room, ride for half an hour, breakfast at 10:30, we leave at 11, we take you to the hotel, 3Ks from the start, we just warn you, you have lunch, have a sleep, bring you to the start an hour before. So there was no stress for him. And as Tadej said after the time trial, he knew every pothole in the road. He knew his equipment was going to stand up to the test because he'd done a full tilt time trial in open traffic. We had one of our other riders there, Michael Bjerg, for that simulation. He's been triple world champion in the junior and under 23 ranks. And Mikkel started 2.5 minutes ahead of Tadej and finished 100 metres ahead of him at the finish line. So Tadej in his mind was very relaxed that he had everything under control. And I think that was the difference with Roglic. That helmet should never have been introduced on that day. He did a simulation the morning of the TT. I mean, that he shouldn't have been doing either. As leader, that only creates more stress. And I'm not saying they didn't do it the right way, but I just think we did it the better way. And it was creating that environment of no stress that really counted.
What did it mean to you? Like, everyone's jumping around. The whole of Slovenia is going nuts, okay? This 21-year-old has bucked the trend by winning, the Grand Tour by at the age of 21, not really doing an apprenticeship, being a super talented rider. You've set them up for success in terms of the 21-day event. But what did it mean to you, Al, when he rode across the line, the Tour de France winner? What did it mean to you?
I think, the lead up to, the last 5 years, the last year, going through chemo, coming back to the bike race, getting the opportunity to be lead director, putting my stamp on the race in the way I wanted to do the race tactically and with my vision there, all came to a head in that time trial. Tadej was the bike rider that needed to do it. But for me personally, when he crossed the line, it was a huge relief, but sort of like a feeling of a lifetime accomplishment. Something that we like pulling a rabbit out of your ass. I had this feeling we could do it. And I was talking about that for 3 weeks, changing the strategy, changing the goals, enticing the guys to believe that we could win the Tour. And you pull it off, at the 11th hour. It was pretty crazy.
But we've started this chat with you being 17 years and 2 weeks old, heading to Europe on a tremendous transit all the way to Belgium, to a moment where I guess the moment of the Tour de France with Tadej, it was all going to that moment. Everything.
Yeah,
was going in.
But Duncan, I was because you're in the bike race, you're inside also this COVID bubble, but you're inside the race. You're not looking at the TV, watching, every detail. I've got a 6-inch screen in front of me that I can hardly see because it drops in and out. Communication on Planche de Belfi was nearly non-existent. So I didn't really have an idea of the impressions outside that the punter has at home in his couch watching TV. I was very much with this kid, very much focused on the race tactic, the pacing strategy, the course notes. I had his Slovenian, national coach in the back seat, speaking to him some motivational stuff. to him in Slovenian. So I didn't really realise it until he crossed the line. And, you know, my boss ran off to the finish line to see him, and the mechanic had to go to the mechanic's place with the bikes to be checked, and I was left with a car. And I got a few congratulations from other directors sportifs there in the car park. And I went over to see the director sportifs from Jumbo Visma, congratulated them, apologised for winning, but went back to my car and sort of just sunk down on my haunches and just had a really good cry, because apart from the things in the last few years, and apart from winning the Tour de France, it's sort of like the culmination of a lifetime of resilience, bouncing back and having that belief to keep carrying on. And I think, you know, if I, like you said, that 17-year-old kid to the leading director sportif in the Tour de France, if I see that path, I can only be proud of what I've achieved in my life. And I think it all came together just at that moment.
Must have been an amazing moment. Like you said, it does take a while because it's all around you. It's not in you yet. In that moment, you know, so much is, and it's coming out in tears and weeping and joy and relief and the gas is out and the pressure's off. You know, how's it been since that? Because now, you know, you get back into your body. Everyone's ploughing into you. Even us today, we're ploughing into you. That we've had this moment, same moment you're having, but different. How's it been for you since? You know, what's been your life since? Because, you know, it is just such an historic victory, and you're really responsible for it.
Thank you.
Well, I've had a lot of, obviously I've had a lot of interviews and people asking me for magazines and you know, other forms of communication, which has been nice. A lot of talk also about the cancer, because it's a social phenomenon. So they've been quite confronting every time, but I never really got to think about the Tour de France until a couple of weeks ago, and before the Ronde of Vlaanderen, a couple of days before. You know, it had been a month since the Tour, and I laid awake one night thinking about all those steps, getting to the Tour de France, in the Tour de France, keeping on believing, even though there's this, you know, things are going against us, trying to keep everybody on board. I went through all of those steps and stayed awake a hell of a long time that night, and it really sort of sunk in, the achievement there. And, you know, I don't say that in a blasé way, but, you know, sometimes things fall into place in your life and you need to be grateful for it, and I am grateful for it.
What's the future hold for you, Al?
Well, I signed a new 2-year contract with UAE. I can keep
Well
my car.
How much do director sportifs earn these days in a 2-year contract, Al?
Well, they gave me a little bit more than last year. And look,
okay,
you know, apart from that, they paid me all year while I went through cancer treatment. They paid me all year while we went through COVID lockdown. When I left BMC 2 years ago through my own choice, I made up a pros and cons list of which team I'd like to go to. And I contacted or been contacted by probably 10 teams. And UAE came out ahead, as funny as that sounds, because I wanted a new challenge, going to an all-Italian-speaking team where nobody knew me, where nobody had any preconceived ideas, where I would have to go out and prove myself and my value again. I'm in the team that I'm meant to be in. So the contract didn't really make a difference. It was just, it's that recognition of what you've achieved that's translated through a contract, you know?
Yeah, no, fantastic, mate. Now we're going to move to our voice from the bunch, Diane Hannon. But just a couple of quick comments here from Megan. I love how you made time for you so you could be the best you could possibly be for the riders and the entire team. Something we can easily bring into our day-to-day lives to help us stay connected at work and home. So thank you, Alan. Nick Horse said, it still looks very emotional, Alan. Going into the tour before the start, how your confidence levels were versus the dreaming and the aiming, and especially of Tade actually winning. Well done. Megan says, well done. All your hard work, sacrifice paid off. What an incredible achievement. John Pitchinen says, first class Alan Peiper, thank you for sharing your time and story with us. Now, Diane, what would you like to say to Alan to say thank you for the rest of us? Diane? Diane's going to be on the top of Mount Cootha. Are you there, Diane? Where is she? She must be doing an extra loop. That's okay. I'll do it. Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you so much for joining us from your Belgian home. Please thank your beautiful wife, Isabel. Yes, yes, we can, Di. You go for it.
Oh my God, don't deprive me of this moment. Oh my God. Alan, can I borrow you every Wednesday morning? Because that has been the most motivating hill session I've ever done. I reckon it was the just ride your bike. I loved that. It was also the you're going to fight your whole way to Paris. So that was me this morning, fighting my whole way to the roundabout to get back down to be in this spot on time. You're just awesome. Your humility is amazing. Your leadership is amazing. The thing that probably struck me most was your comments about going from hero to zero. I think everybody relates to that in some part in their life, whether it's in their career, their health, or in their training. And I think probably what's amazing about you, just from the bit that I've learned about you, it's actually how you've taken that. You've chosen to see it as a challenge, and most importantly, I think something all of us can take from you is the learnings. Like, you have taken every learning all the way through your life to this point. I've just found you incredibly inspiring. Also very emotional. Oh my God, that last bit there, you really got me with a pinch. So for anybody who was looking at me, I think they probably thought I was taking my training a bit too seriously this morning. But yeah, that's that story about Podjakar. Last thing to say is I don't think it was an accident that you got there this year. I think everything you do, your planning, your preparation, your belief in yourself, your confidence, but most importantly, your humility. You're a standout guest. And can I borrow you next Wednesday?
I could be back here, yeah.
It was awesome. You. My glasses are probably fogging up now.
And
that's me, the voice of the bunch.
Thank you very much. The voice from the real bunch. Thank you very much, Diane. Bunch. Maybe, Alan, you can get a recording made of your story and send it around, and we can just re-listen and re-listen. But thank you very much, mate. Please thank your beautiful wife, Isabel, and your 3 cats. I hear that you've got a cat farm going over there in Belgium. You've got Sam, the cat, which is the new addition. You've got Mary, who happens to be a he-she male cat, and you've got a cat named Philip Gilbert. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Philip Gilbert. He was a wild cat and still wild after 10 years. Still can't pick him up. And he's a killer. So, you know, always coming back with a mouse or a rat or a mole. And that's just how Philip Gilbert was, a real killer. Someone who's got a prickly edge, and if you touch him, you're lucky to get scratched. So,
he's the perfect cat for you, mate.
Yeah.
He's the perfect cat for you. But anyway, good evening to you in Belgium, and thank you so much for joining Telstra Connected Cycling. It's a real pleasure to have you along. Thank you to everybody doing their job. You're getting a virtual clap from right around Australia and right around the world, Alan. I hope you can see a little bit of that, especially on Mount Cootha with Diane. And thank you so much, mate. We're all tragic cyclists or walkers or people in sport, or Jeff Coombs, who keeps on showing us a beautiful Sydney Harbour as he walks along with that great smile. But we're right behind you, mate. And if there's anything you might need, we're here for you. So God bless, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Alan.
So good. Thanks, Alan.